Hi everyone, my name is Lee and I own an Etsy shop called Jewelry Designs by Lee. Most of my work is done using a material called Fordite, and I'd like to take a little bit of time to explain what Fordite is, show you some of the raw material that I start with, and in some videos for later we'll get into exactly how I go about turning what we see today into my jewelry. Okay, so here we are at my display table here, where I've got a number of pieces of Fordite to show you, and basically let's start with what is Fordite. Fordite is, by most definitions anyway, it's the accumulation of overspray paint that happened when auto manufacturers would put various parts of cars on various systems for transport through the paint booths and into the ovens for baking. Anything that they would need to paint, they would create some sort of a rack system along with some sort of a rail system that they could transport things in and out of paint booths. That overspray paint would get all over everything, and depending on how directly in the flow of the spray something was, it might accumulate paint pretty quickly. Other areas might not accumulate it nearly as fast, but ultimately at some point they would need to get the paint off of all of this stuff, or it would basically make everything grind to a halt. So they would come in and remove this paint when it got to be too much, and then some of the auto workers could see that there might be some intrinsic value in the material, and so they would save it, and a vast majority of it got thrown away, but obviously some of it got saved, and so that's what the classic definition of Fordite is. This is a piece here that actually came from the Corvette factory, and I've actually visited that facility before and have a pretty good idea of how things are done there. And I guess something that I kind of want to illustrate, and I don't know if it's going to focus well enough for this, but at the longest point that you can see there are literally like hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 layers of paint, and you can't even begin to count all of those layers, okay? But they're all very, very thin, okay? And that is a key characteristic of real Fordite, is that you've got these very, very thin layers and many, many of them. In this particular case, this must have been relatively close to the paint gun, because frankly it got so intense that it started making a paint drip, and eventually it ended up being a several inch long paint icicle. When I went to the Corvette factory, I can tell you that the frames that they used to transport the bodies in and out of the paint area were indeed like a rectangular metalwork structure, and you can see here very clearly that this piece of paint came from a rectangular frame. If you look at something that came from the Wayne Ford factory up in Wayne, Michigan, okay, historically almost everything that I get from there, they made like round frames, and you can see that the transport frames they made definitely used like round tubing, in contrast to what they use in the Corvette factory. This is a piece of paint that came from the Rouge factory, Ford Rouge up in Michigan, okay, and this is actually dated to the late 1950s. And this is a piece that came from the Rouge factory, and I've dated it to be 1969 vintage. And you can visit me at jewelrydesignsbylee.com. I'll try to put a link up so that you can go to my shop. And later I'll make a video that shows you what happens when I go to cut this material.